Welcome back to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being truly well-informed, packed with surprising facts and just enough humor to keep you hooked. Today we're diving into something lots of people are talking about, the power of diet, specifically the gluten-free diet, for managing chronic conditions.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic. And it's spread way beyond just celiac disease, hasn't it?
It really has. Okay, let's unpack this. We're focusing today on Hashimoto's thyroiditis, HT for short. It's actually the most common autoimmune condition out there worldwide.
That's right.
And the big question, the sort of burning question for many is, can going gluten-free actually help manage Hashimoto's, even if you haven't been diagnosed with celiac disease?
That's a critical question.
So to get to the bottom of this, we're doing a deep dive into a pretty rigorous meta-analysis. It's by Pathophysiology and colleagues, came out just last year.
A very timely study.
Exactly. It tackles this exact issue head-on.
It really does. And maybe before we dive into the study itself, we should just quickly clarify what Hashimoto's actually is.
Good idea. Lay the groundwork.
Okay, so imagine your immune system, which is, supposed to be your defender.
Right.
In Hashimoto's, it gets confused. It mistakenly targets and attacks your own thyroid gland.
So friendly fire, basically.
Pretty much. These immune cells, lymphocytes, they infiltrate the thyroid. And this leads to the body producing specific antibodies. You might hear them called antithyroglobulin, or TgAb,
Okay.
and antithyroperoxidase, or TPOAb. Think of them as markers, like little flags showing this attack is happening.
Got it. Markers of the internal battle.
Exactly. And over time, this attack often damages the thyroid enough that it can't produce enough thyroid hormone. That's hypothyroidism.
And how common is this?
Surprisingly common.
Yeah.
Affects about 5% of the general population. And there's a really significant gender difference. It affects women far more often than men, like more than 10 times more often.
Wow, 10 to 1. That's significant. Now, this immune confusion, does it usually happen in isolation? Or does Hashimoto's often sort of buddy up with other conditions, especially gluten-related ones?
That's where it gets really interesting. You hit on a key point. Hashimoto's very frequently coexists with other autoimmune issues.
Okay.
Particularly gastrointestinal disorders. Celiac disease obviously is one, but also what researchers lump together as gluten-related conditions, or GRC.
GRC, what does that include beyond celiac?
So GRC is a bit broader in this context. It covers things like non-celiac gluten sensitivity. That's where people react negatively to gluten but don't meet the criteria for celiac disease.
Right, I've heard of that.
And it can even include cases where someone might incidentally test positive for certain gluten-related antibodies like anti-TTG, but they don't have any symptoms or, crucially, the gut biopsy confirmation of celiac.
So it's not just a gut feeling people have, there's a real statistical link between Hashimoto's and these GRCs.
Oh, absolutely. The data shows celiac disease, or these GRCs, are found in somewhere between, say, 2% and 9% of people with Hashimoto.
Okay, that's quite a range, but still significant.
It is. And flip it around, if you look at people with celiac disease, autoimmune thyroiditis, like Hashimoto's, is the most common other autoimmune disorder they have.
That overlap is just too strong to ignore, isn't it? It really suggests there might be some shared roots.
Precisely. It points towards some kind of shared underlying story.
Mm-hmm.
Researchers are looking at a couple of main possibilities.
Like what?
Well, one is shared genetics. Certain gene variations, like specific HLA types, seem to make people more susceptible to both kinds of conditions.
Okay, genetics makes sense. What else?
The other big area, and this is getting a lot of traction, is the gut microbiota. The trillions of bacteria living in our gut.
Right, the microbiome.
Exactly. An imbalance there, what we call dysbiosis, seems to play a role. And this dysbiosis might lead to something many people have heard about, leaky gut.
Ah, yes, leaky gut. It's a term that's thrown around a lot. What does it actually mean in this context, like scientifically?
It basically means increased intestinal permeability. Think of your gut lining as a very sophisticated barrier, right? It's meant to let digested nutrients pass through into your bloodstream, but keep out undigested food particles, toxins, bacteria, things like that. With leaky gut, the junctions between the cells lining the gut become a bit looser, less selective.
So things sneak through that shouldn't.
Exactly. These unwanted substances, antigens, get into your bloodstream, and that can trigger your immune system system-wide. It's like setting off alarms all over the body.
And that could connect back to the thyroid?
Potentially, yes. This systemic immune activation could lead to cross-reactions, where the immune system mistakenly attacks tissues outside the gut, like the thyroid. It suggests a direct line, almost, from gut health to thyroid autoimmunity.
Okay, so with that potential gut-thyroid link and this idea of leaky gut being maybe triggered or worsened by gluten in some people, well, it suddenly makes a lot more sense why so many people with Hashimoto's try going gluten-free, even if they're not celiac.
It does follow a certain logic, doesn't it? And their intuition might not be entirely off base.
Right.
I mean, a gluten-free diet, a GFD, is absolutely non-negotiable for diagnosed celiac disease. But many with Hashimoto's try it, hoping for broader anti-inflammatory effects, even without that CD diagnosis.
And what are the proposed ways it might help, if it does?
Well, there are several proposed mechanisms. It could potentially help by reducing that gut permeability, that leakiness.
Okay.
It might help rebalance the gut microbiota, addressing the dysbiosis. It could improve the absorption of key nutrients, things like selenium, vitamin D, zinc, which are really important for thyroid function.
That makes sense. Better absorption.
And for those already on thyroid medication like levothyroxine, it might even improve how well that medication is absorbed. So it's potentially hitting multiple targets.
Here's where it gets really interesting then. All this theory, the leaky gut connection, the self-experimentation, does it actually hold up when you look at the hard data? Which brings us back to the Peticchio meta-analysis. What was their specific mission? What question did they want to definitively answer?
Their aim was laser-focused. They wanted to gather and synthesize all the existing studies looking at the effect of a gluten-free diet on those thyroid antibodies, TgAb and TPOAb, and the main thyroid hormones, TSH, FT4, and FT3.
Okay.
But crucially, they only included studies on patients with Hashimoto's who did not have symptoms or the gut biopsy proof of actual celiac disease.
So looking beyond celiac disease specifically, how did they go about it? What was the method?
They followed Moose guidelines, which is a standard for ensuring quality and meta-analyses of observational studies. Very rigorous.
Good.
They searched the big medical databases, PubMed and Scopus, up until February 2023. Their initial search pulled up 409 articles.
Wow, quite a few.
Yeah, but after applying their strict criteria, focusing only on Hashimoto's without clinical celiac disease, looking at GFD effects, they ended up with just 4 studies suitable for the main quantitative analysis.
Only 4 out of over 400.
Yes. It really highlights how little high-quality research there actually was on this specific question until recently.
That's quite telling. So what did those 4 studies look like? How many people?
Altogether, those 4 studies involved a total of 87 patients. The average time they followed the gluten-free diet was about 6 months.
Okay, 87 patients. Not a huge number, but maybe enough to see trends.
Exactly. And it's important to note, all the participants were adult women aged between 25 and 42, and significantly, almost half of them, 47 out of 87, had those gluten-related conditions, GRC, that we talked about. Not celiac, but some form of gluten sensitivity or antibody presence.
Right, the GRC distinction. That seems critical. So what did they find? Let's start with the antibodies, TgAb and TPOAb. Did the GFD lower them?
What's fascinating here is the overall trend. When they pulled the data from all 87 patients, they saw a trend towards reduction in both TgAb and TPOAb levels.
A trend, okay. So not quite hitting statistical significance overall.
Not quite. It was close, like P0.06 for TgAb and P0.07 for TPOAb. Almost there, but not quite meeting the usual threshold for significance.
Ah, okay. But did they dig deeper?
They did. And this is the crucial part. They looked at whether the effect was different in different types of patients, and they found the reduction in antibodies was primarily driven by the patients who had those gluten-related conditions, the GRC group.
Really? So for that specific group?
Yes. For the patients with both Hashimoto's and GRC, the reduction in both TgAb and TPOAb was statistically significant, and the effect size was actually quite large, p-value of 0.02 for both antibodies in that GRC subgroup.
Wow. That's a huge distinction. So it's not necessarily helping everyone with Hashimoto's equally, but for those with that underlying gluten sensitivity, it seems to make a real difference to the autoimmune markers.
That's exactly what this data suggests. It points towards a much stronger effect in that GRC subgroup.
Okay, that's antibodies. What about the actual hormone levels? TSH, FT4, FT3, did the diet change those?
Yes, there were significant findings there, too. For TSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone, they found a statistically significant reduction overall.
Lower TSH is generally good in hypothyroidism, right? Means the thyroid might be working better?
Generally, yes. Or it could mean medication is working better. And complementing that, they found a statistically significant increase in free thyroxine, FT4.
Okay, lower TSH, higher FT4, both pointing towards improved thyroid status. What about FT3? That's the more active hormone.
For FT3, free triiodothyronine, The overall analysis across all patients didn't show a significant change.
Okay.
However, if we connect this to the bigger picture, just like with the antibodies, the sub-analyses told a different story.
Subgroup effects again.
Exactly. A statistically significant difference did emerge for FT3 levels when they looked specifically at the patients with GRC.
Interesting. So GRC patients saw improvements in FT3 too.
It seems so, yes.
Yeah.
P 0.04. And interestingly, a significant difference in FT3 also showed up in the subgroup of patients who were already taking a stable dose of levothyroxine, the thyroid medication.
So even for people already on treatment, the diet might be improving the conversion to active hormone or maybe absorption, like you mentioned earlier.
That's certainly what the data hints at. The researchers speculated could be related to several things we touched on.
Right, the proposed mechanisms. Can you remind us what those were again? How might gluten removal actually do all this?
Sure. They reiterate the potential mechanisms: improving gut barrier function, fixing the leaky gut,
Okay.
positively influencing the gut microbiota, reducing that dysbiosis, enhancing absorption of those key thyroid nutrients, iodine, selenium, zinc, vitamin D,
Right, the micronutrients.
improving the absorption of levothyroxine itself in patients who are taking it,
Makes sense.
and potentially reducing overall systemic inflammation, which might help the body convert FT4 into the more active FT3 more effectively. It seems like a cascade starting from the gut.
It really paints a picture of the gut-thyroid axis being quite central here. But this raises an important question, like how solid is this evidence? What are the study's own limitations?
Yeah, that's crucial, and the authors are upfront about it. The most obvious limitation is the small number of patients, only 87 across the 4 studies.
Right, 87 isn't a massive sample.
No, it's not. So while the findings are suggestive, they need confirmation in larger groups. We have to be cautious about generalizing too broadly from this.
Okay, small sample size. What else?
There's the point about potential misclassification. While they excluded clinical celiac disease, some GRC patients had positive anti-TgAb antibodies without symptoms or biopsy.
Meaning some might have had undiagnosed silent celiac disease.
It's a possibility. However, the paper does counter this somewhat, citing other research showing that positive anti-TTG tests alone, especially in adults without symptoms, have a pretty high false positive rate for actual celiac disease. So it might not be as big an issue as it sounds, but it's a point to consider.
Fair enough. What about the patients already on medication? Did that muddy the waters?
It could have, but they did address it. Some patients were on stable levothyroxine before the diet change. But remember, the sub-analysis showed effects even in that group, particularly for FT3. So the diet seems to have an impact independent of, or perhaps synergistic with, the medication.
Okay, so acknowledging those limitations, what's the big takeaway here? What's the headline from this meta-analysis?
The big takeaway is that this meta-analysis suggests a genuine positive effect of going gluten-free on thyroid autoimmunity, the antibodies, and on thyroid function, the hormones.
Okay, a positive effect.
But, and this is key, this effect seems particularly pronounced in those Hashimoto's patients who also have gluten-related conditions, the GRC group.
Got it. So promising, especially for a specific subgroup. But what's the really crucial caveat? Should everyone with Hashimoto's rush out and ditch gluten?
Absolutely not. And the paper is very clear on this. The current evidence is not strong enough yet to recommend a gluten-free diet to all patients just based on a Hashimoto's diagnosis.
Okay, that's important, not a blanket recommendation.
Definitely not. And partly because adopting a GFD when it's not medically necessary isn't without potential downsides.
Right. People often think gluten-free automatically means healthier, but that's not always true, is it?
It's really not. Going gluten-free often means relying more on processed gluten-free replacement products. Breads, pastas, snacks.
Yeah, the supermarket aisles are full of them now.
And many of those products can actually be higher in things like unhealthy fats, trans fats, salt, and sugar, and they often have a higher glycemic index compared to their gluten-containing whole grain counterparts.
So potentially trading one set of issues for another.
Potentially. They can also be lower in essential nutrients like protein, fiber, B vitamins, and iron. So if you don't need to avoid gluten for celiac or a clear GRC, adopting a poorly planned GFD could, paradoxically, increase your long-term risk for other problems like metabolic issues.
So it really needs careful consideration and probably professional guidance if someone is thinking about it.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be a casual decision based on a trend.
What do the researchers say we need next then? Where does the research go from here?
They clearly call for more research.
Yeah.
Specifically, New randomized controlled trials, RCTs, but on much larger groups of patients.
The gold standard RCTs.
Exactly. We need those larger, well-designed trials to really confirm these findings, understand the mechanisms better, and figure out precisely which Hashimoto's patients benefit most and how best to implement the diet if needed. The current data is a strong signal, but we need more robust evidence before changing broad clinical guidelines.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? This deep dive really gives us a much more nuanced picture, doesn't it?
It really does.
A gluten-free diet seems to hold real promise, particularly for people dealing with both Hashimoto's and those underlying gluten-related conditions. It really shines a light on that powerful gut-thyroid connection. But crucially, it's not a magic bullet for every single person with Hashimoto's. And just jumping onto the GFD bandwagon without a clear reason and without careful planning might even bring its own set of risks.
It definitely highlights the need for personalization in managing these conditions.
Totally. It underscores the importance of personalized approaches, working with healthcare providers, and not just chasing dietary trends without understanding the science behind them. It really makes you wonder, though, how might future research, digging deeper into that gut-thyroid link, maybe combined with more personalized testing and treatments, change how we approach autoimmune diseases like Hashimoto's through diet?
It's an exciting frontier.
Yeah. What questions does this deep dive spark for you about that intricate connection between what's happening in your gut and your overall health, especially your immune system? Something to think about. We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, more informed perspective on a really complex topic. Join us next time for another journey into the latest insights.